I'm wondering why the commissioners don't change the protocol so that strength of schedule is a weighted metric and add more points of clarification and direction for the committee so that there is a clear emphasis on it instead of the ambiguous way it's currently been. Because the commissioners wrote the protocol, as I understand.
You're wondering why?
Mm-hmm.
So commissioners have asked for that, and I think we have an opportunity to learn a little bit more when we gather in mid-June.
So there's consideration to rewrite the protocol?
No, I think there's a learning opportunity again in June. I won't predict what that means.
Hey Greg, the transfer portal came up with a couple coaches today. Have you been discussing timing of the portal, especially in regards to football or any?
Yeah, on that one, I walked into football coaches meeting, and one of the issues that they had preset to talk with me is the transfer portal. There have been, there's an AFCA idea to do it in January, then there was an idea from, I'm not sure where to do it in May, then one in March and April. So they reiterated they think what we've done as a conference is healthy. We don't have an interconference transfer opportunity in the spring. I think that informs that it would be healthier to have a transfer portal in January, to just have one 10-day period that allows people to move, but also allows you to prepare your team, go through spring together. There's not anything that can replace the volume of time and that preparation. And then the desire would be to keep that continuity through May, June into the season. I think there's an idea, I'm not sure who or what it's attributed to, that April is the ideal date. We talked specifically through, you're gonna have people that don't wanna be there, you don't have a January portal. You're gonna have tampering as people think about, well, maybe I'm gonna move in April. Those are two high-level concerns, and where our coaches were is that kind of an April idea is highly problematic, and they prefer a January portal. That was the AFCA's concept coming out of their meetings in Charlotte in January, but they'd rather have January and spring rather than some kind of April circumstance where there's no other outlet.
Could they?
That was the message to me.
I'm sorry. Could they? Kirby was in here earlier and he talked about the fiscal year for the cap. Is there any way they could reset that, or does that come out of the House settlement?
Comes out of the settlement. I won't speculate on management of that. You have to figure out, as I shared with the coaches, what are the drivers here and how do you adapt? And if the calendar became that January portal idea again from the AFCA, I think we'd adapt to that in the revenue sharing era.
And
Just
Greg,
one
that
then, Greg,
window would
sorry.
be after the playoffs?
Pete had his hand up first, Kurt.
oh,
So-
I'm sorry.
Just a quick clarification, then Kirk can go. It just one, your coaches, the consensus in the room, they said you was just one portal.
That's
intake.
the preference.
That's the preference.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and then they said, we'd rather have the current circumstance of moving to some kind of April-only portal. I think
Okay.
that's highly problematic.
Got it.
But their pivot is back to the AFCA January concept.
Thank you.
Kirk,
Yeah, thank you.
he's just quick
Appreciate it.
Rick.
He dresses better too.
for now.
Is it your understanding if you do go to a 10-day window, it'd be in January or after the playoffs ended January?
Well, the conversation I had was starting after the New Year's Day bowls for about 10 days, and then you've got accommodations for semis and championships. We had that this
So
year.
it would still be during the
Yeah,
playoffs, but it only
people-
affect 4 teams.
Right, and I think we saw continuity this year, generally, and it allows the bulk of young people to make a decision. I mean, this is an idea, it's not like it's chiseled in stone at this point. That was the discussion with me. Good faith.
Greg, did you hear from any of your colleagues at other conferences after your comments yesterday?
No, as entertained as everybody else. They all have thick skin. Kirk, back to you.
Is it your understanding that all SEC schools would fully fund the revenue sharing, that they all be up to speed and?
Well, the beauty of this league is I really don't have to ask that question. I think the competitive spirit drives the answer of yes, without having to ask the question.
And do you hear from any of them that they're concerned about maybe considering dropping non-revenue sports?
We had that conversation up front. I think the concern whenever you have $20 million that goes out from one year to another, you've seen people reporting about staff cuts or different methods of travel. I think that's an indication of the dialogue last year that our schools very much want to continue with the breadth of sports. So short term, continuing with sports sponsorship is absolutely at the forefront of their thinking. How things develop and the pressures that are created down the road, people are attentive to. I said at media days 3 or 4 years ago that when you change the economic model of college sports, you change our Olympic development and our Olympic support program. And I think we're all attentive to that. And we continue to have those conversations. We want to be successful in, you know, that so-called non-revenue sports, but they have a great deal of meaning on our campuses. And I think that drives the philosophy, but this change is an enormous change, and I think it's been underappreciated when you have that amount of money flowing out of a budget, what it could mean. And
So, is there a drop dead date by which the CFP needs a format for 2026?
yeah, it's like December 1st, I think by contract.
Is
Maybe
that,
it's November 30th, so don't hold me to that.
that seems somewhat inconvenient for some of the things that at least seem a little contingent that you guys would like to decide.
Yeah, sure, I've shared that. No secret, I need to make a scheduling decision in 2026. So when I express frustration about delays that have happened before and decisions not made, those manifest themselves both in that room, and we didn't spend time on the question about what's the criteria look like in this new era. We just kind of sat around, and it affects timing of other decisions, but that's life, you know. You control what you can control. We can control our scheduling decision, we can't control every other element around us.
So if that process just keeps on going, you just have to make a scheduling decision.
We talked about our flexibility from dates. I learned during COVID when I predicted when we had to make a decision, and we went 2 weeks later, that when you ask me the follow-up, like when do you have to make a decision by, you should write that in pencil. Because, you know, you may be close, you may buy a little bit of time, but yeah, it's a bit of an inconvenient reality, but that's reality.
Does the 9-game schedule and the play-in, are they absolutely dependent on the format, or could there be other factors that, for instance, have you go to 9 games, or do the play-in format, even if the playoff, the CFP?
Well, the 9-game schedules, like real play-in formats or concepts, they're just out there. So, is there somebody who said we have to have one to have the other? Yep. Do I think that way? I don't. You can make independent decisions. Back to my observation, you can make decisions about what you can control, and then you can have influence over other decisions you don't control, you participate in. But the timing's not what I would have designed from an optimal standpoint.
Greg, at one time
I was going, right, yep.
Were there conversations, presentations about the NIL Go organization, and how has that been received amongst everyone in the group?
There have been, and I was not in the meeting for those presentations. So I think those are highly professional people. We had the Deloitte team in. I've heard different presentations, had different questions from different groups. LDI, who's the cap management group, was here as well, sharing their work or their plans for their work. Nobody stopped me so far afterwards to say, hey, this or that. So I think they were appropriate and well prepared and well presented. That would be my guess from not having been in the room.
at one time, under the divisional schedule model, the SEC protected rivalries like Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. How comfortable would you be with those rivalries going away on an annual basis and the 8-game schedule persisting?
For sake of clarity, at one time we protected those rivalries in division schedule, and we protected those rivalries in an 8-game schedule last year and this year. And we have a variety of alternatives. An alternative we presented is to protect those in an 8-game schedule going forward as well.
So you're saying you could stay at 8 games and protect some primary rivalries such as the Iron Bowl and secondary rivalries within an 8-game schedule?
Well, secondary is an interesting term.
You could protect 2 rivalry games per team. For a particular
I'm not
team.
committing to that, but we're attentive to real key rivalries and have models that can accommodate those that have been shared and will continue to be shared.
How new is that?
How new is what?
That this idea to protect these other rivalries within an 8-game schedule if you stick with 8 games?
It's not new.
It's been there.
Well, we've protected them these 2 years, so the conversation about annual games that need to be played has been a focus since August of 21, when we had our first gathering of athletics directors and talked about what the schedule might look like. We have, renewal of a rivalry as well, so it's not only those that have always been played, the South Soldiers rivalry, but others that are back. So, yeah, we have ideas. Matt?
Hey, Scott Strickland says he's not sure that there's a need for the selection committee. Would you agree with that? And how further down the road do you think that can get?
The First Amendment is alive and well. People have opinions. My personal view is, to Heather's question, I think there's some work being done by the CFP staff and some members of the committee to look at both policies and metrics. I think that's really healthy, and I think that could work within a selection committee room. I think that can continue. We had the BCS era. I reminded athletics directors, first of all, I used to sit in those meetings as an observer, as the detail of what's included, what's not included, how the BCS ratings were calculated was being developed. Those were the most boring meetings of my career, and I've been in some boring meetings. We didn't always benefit, so people could say, well, we had teams left out by a committee, and we had an undefeated Auburn team not in that final game as an outcome of computer ranking. So I think there's a balance personally in between.
But you got LSU in that game because of the computer rating the year before, in 03.
Sure, but it's the frustration of the moment that seems to drive a lot of conversation. We need to understand the frustration of the moment. That coin has 2 sides to it. Heather?
How confident are you that the commissioners can come to an agreement on future playoff format by December 1, and if it doesn't happen, then what happens?
What gives me comfort is I talked to Roy Kramer about a month ago, and we were just relaying ideas, and he said, me and Delaney and Hanson and Swafford and the Big 12 changed a little bit. We walked out of some of those rooms and we weren't going to talk to each other for a year. We hated each other as we walked out, and we always figured a way out. I take great comfort, and I take that there's a responsibility to figure that out too. You might get mad in the moment. We've been mad at different times, and we've been able to work together. Different people, but I think that description gives me great comfort. Plus, I hope when I'm 94, approaching 95, I can remember in that level of detail some of the moments I've gone through in this role, just like Roy does.
Would you just bring order to this by just retiring from SEC commissioner and taking over as a college football coach?
Yeah. I'm not sure how many votes I'd get for the second part. Probably not sure how many votes I'd get for the first part, my side. You know, that's one, we made headlines yesterday, so what the heck, let's make some headlines today. When I went through the Sugar Bowl experience, you realize how many disparate people are involved. And this isn't a criticism, but there's not a central connection point. When I walked into the coaches meeting and we're talking about transfers and windows in January or April, or we do it in December, you know, I've never been one that thinks you're gonna have a czar. So people have asked me about a czar. I'm like, that didn't work really well for Russia. Then we have, like the drug czar thing, remember that? That didn't really, based on what I can see in culture, didn't solve the problem back in the 80s. I think people are gonna have difficult time just subjecting themselves to some imperial order, particularly me. You do go through things where you're like, wow, more coordination could help. I think we work on that, but we all have our own perspectives. And I actually think the different perspectives can help us. Doesn't mean there's not frustration, there's not differences, but you know, if the person shows up with the easy button to solve all this, I'll be as surprised as anyone.
Greg, you mentioned that you discussed timing of transfer portal. Have you discussed transfer rate as a conference? Is it, are you studying it all, or what sort of information are you getting, and is it problematic, or is it just kind of a sign of the times and people are dealing with it?
Pat looked deeply at numbers and that information at a meeting in mid-February with coaches and athletics directors. Mid-February was a long time ago, so I can't like quote that off the top of my head. We did talk today about the lack of a spring portal for intra-conference transfers, and I asked our football coaches, as a follow-up to last year, they observed it was a healthier time when we didn't have the intra-conference transfer than when we did. And I asked them that again today, so we went to that kind of anecdotal depth. I think the issue that we miss, which I think is embedded in your question, is the number of young people lost to the system because of the transfer freedom. So we can all report stories of, wow, wasn't it great that somebody went from point A to point B and it worked? But there's attrition that's there, and there's academic attrition, lost credits that our young people talk to us about. And then there's loss of connection, loss of opportunity. So it's not all a bed of roses that it's gonna be better. We've talked about, there's a lot of people in the ears of young people telling them it's gonna be better. So that's not data driven, I think that's reality driven. And I think one of the underreported realities is really kind of aggregating not only the data, but the stories about young people who said, well, the grass is gonna be greener, and that wasn't, or promises or representations that went unfulfilled. How we get at that, we talk about, we've tried to extrapolate the losses, but that's a difficult thing to do. Because you're not, I think you're tracking within NCAA transfers, so you don't know if they went NAI or went JUCO and then recovered. So you don't want to over-report it, but I do think that's a misunderstanding. And I'm speaking as a 4.24 transfer. My college career took 5 years. So I understand fully the benefits of transferring when you don't quite have it right, or your life changes, or your decisions about someplace change. But nobody's recruiting me, so let's be honest, that's not the world we live in right now.
Greg, can you give us a little insight into the meetings today? There's obviously an inherent push-pull with the big looming issues from the CFP to 8 verse 9. Just give me a little
Take me through my day?
Yeah, I mean, we're at meetings.
The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I went for an hour-long walk to clear my head. I listened to a set of podcasts. Came back and made some notes about introducing in the AD meeting, and there were 4 issues. CFP football scheduling for an executive session. Talked about state laws. We have 7 or 8 state laws, so people always react to the last state law. We talked about settlement. I think we had a very clear conversation with our ADs about their focus on making settlement work. think that's an important conversation. We'll have something similar with presidents tomorrow. We then went into the football scheduling, CFP conversation, looked at different models, looked at information, different opinions presented, questions asked of me. We talked about timing, whoever asked me about timing, that we may not be able to meet our optimal time frame. You know, that's kind of life. Then met with the faculty reps. You asked, so I'm giving it to you. This is going live on Sports Center. Anticipate. Women's basketball coaches, football coaches, men's basketball coaches. Women's basketball coaches, we talked about revenue sharing opportunities on campuses and differences. And we'd had a long conversation about specific percent allocations. Good conversation with them about how do they continue to improve the interest in their game. Talked about how can they draw more people in, how can that grow their revenue, sports specific. We talked about transfer policy there as well. Football coaches, I didn't have the graphics ready, and I walked them through a similar presentation about CFP ideas that are out there. So I guess I'm assigned the responsibility for some different models, depending on who's writing what, but we just talked through a set of models. We talked about scheduling, and we talked about transfers, and then in basketball, we talked about other conferences first. I kind of like to focus on our conferences. What are you hearing? What are they doing? You know, my message to them is, and my message to everybody is, like, I could walk down and say, hey, this isn't going to work, whatever it is. We have a responsibility to make work. That's called leadership. Saying things won't work, that's not leadership. You know, they're concerned about other conferences, some without football. What does that mean practically? And so the tension raising for me is real. And then we had an executive committee meeting, which is all confidential.
Greg,
did you have a conversation about the Tennessee bill that would do away with the cap on revenue sharing?
Well, I don't think that's specific. We talked about all of the state laws that may intersect the settlement, and I think there are 7 different states, and that conversation will continue.
Greg, do you expect?
John, sure. I saw him first. I don't go to my right as well as I used to.
Directly related to that, like I guess in these kind of meeting settings, what if anything can you do to try to discourage state lawmakers from creating laws that either supersede SEC bylaws and or create competitive advantages over other member institutions?
It's even a bigger conversation. We talked about introducing common state legislation in the fall. We in our office spent a lot of time drafting a bill that would be uniform, because our coaches will say, look, I care about what happens here at the top of my list. So you have executive orders. We talked pretty candidly about each of them. We've had ongoing dialogue. There are different reasons in different states for different laws, and people will share those. I have said directly, you cannot operate a national system with a bunch of different state laws. You cannot operate a 12-state conference system with a bunch of state laws. In 2019, my message to the NCAA leadership then was, relative to California, just writing letters threatening wasn't the issue. You're gonna have to look directly, and I think this gets mischaracterized, do you file a lawsuit under the dormant commerce clause? The NCAA Board of Governors chose not to do so. Part of what I thought was the states would then just do what they're doing now, and that's gonna race to the bottom. And I ask our schools, like, do you want no oversight, no regulation, or do you want a system with regulation? And in every one of these rooms over time, no, we want a system that's got oversight, that has structure, that provides new opportunities. And then you read about this state law or that state law, not just in our footprint. So there are plenty of people who observe, well, you shouldn't be spending your time in Congress, but Congress sets national standards. I'm curious about the White House interest. I'm not seeing a commission that pops and does something, but I would love, what I would like more than anything else is for some people who can make these decisions to come together at the national level and the congressional level, work through their differences towards a problem solved. Because when you've asked me about, somebody's asked me, Kirk, you've asked me about non-revenue sports. You know what, long term, I'm concerned about our Olympic development program, our Olympic support program. I think the congressional representative should be as well. Like, we've done a great job positioning our 16 universities in a really healthy way to bring people in for football, to bring people in for basketball. But what we want is a level of fair competition. We want people to have the same standards. I think that's healthy. So all of those are manifestations of this state-by-state piece. And I've said things as directly as we need to stop, and then there's something else. I'll go back to, we need national standards so we can have a Final Four, College World Series, whatever it is. It's not gonna work to have 50 different standards long term. We can manage through the chaotic situation now, but it won't work long term.
How much more difficult, logistically speaking, with the NFL and the academic calendar would it be to implement 16 compared to 14 or 12?
I think everything has its logistical difficulties. I think we did 12 really well. Somebody asked me yesterday, I think overall a success. You know, where you have games, I think that's all up for debate. I think there are logistical scheduling solutions. I'd like to not be on the same dates as the NFL. I think the NFL would like not to be on the same dates as college football. But we have, you know, compression for when we start. I also think starting on Labor Day is really healthy. Like, moving back into August means it's only hotter for 2:30 Central kickoffs for our fans and more uncomfortable, and even for the players it's harder. But I continue to talk about solutions, but there's a lot embedded in your question that doesn't exist in like professional sports. So everything that we're doing is just like professional sports comparative. That's not real. I'm waiting for like the NFL team that has to deal with commencement that takes over the town. So those are real, but I think there are probably some opportunities to work around them. They're just not maybe gonna solve every conundrum we have.
Is it difficult to change the contract because it's 12 or 14 teams?
I'm not one who comments on contracts. I think contracts are best left in contracts.
Yeah, Greg, you talk about multiple rivals, annual rivals for a team in the 8-game concept. That would come at the cost of not everybody would play each other twice in a 4-year span. How important is that to the conference, and would that be a concession you think the membership would be willing to give up?
Yeah, that's an impact, and that's one of those discussions that the membership will has had, and depending on timing and 8 versus 9, we'll have the opportunity to decide. We've just take a step back. We have been intent on trying to narrow the competitive bandwidth of our schedule. You know, there's going to be volatility year to year, and then when the season plays out, it might be different than what the last 4 or 10 years predicted. We saw that last year, and so whatever decision we make, we'll keep that effort to keep the competitive bandwidth fairly tight on our mind, whether those are multiple annual rivalry games or only one.
With the speculation about the AQ models, is there any discussion at all about, the coaches have mentioned the importance of the SEC championship game. Do you see any possibility that game wouldn't take place, or do you feel that game's pretty safe?
The coaches actually today talked with me about that importance. And they talked about, I'll call it a 5-11 model a lot with me. And our own ability to earn those berths. So we like yesterday, I don't think there was a lot of belief that we were interested in looking at models. Today, I think represented exactly what I share. And we have had conversations today about the meaning of a conference championship still being retained. So I thought those were good things. And yesterday when I was asked, I said, look, doing away with that's not like anywhere near the top of my agenda with the issues we have right now.
What was the feeling about the 5-11 model? What was the temperature there?
Well, it was cold, so that's why I have pullovers here. But at the coaching level, The question is, why wouldn't that be fine? Why wouldn't we do that? We talked about 16 with them. So, good conversation, not a destination, but first time I've had the ability to go really in depth with ideas with them.
Commissioner has a reception to go to. Take one more question. Also, Lane Kiffin's coming in. Get back up to the time that he missed earlier.
Greg, do you expect?
I think I'd rather just go longer. Just let me take Lane's time.
That would not be good for Kyle Campbell's health.
I'll eventually relent. Oh, so now you made the Lane Kiffin offer, nobody asked me. That's offensive.
Dude, we're tired.
What is your pencil deadline for 8 versus 9 games?
Just what I said earlier, that I learned during COVID, I could give you a number and I can move if circumstances change.
All right, thank you.
COVID, I said, I remember July 30th, or excuse me, I just gave the answer away. I said, we're gonna have to decide by July 23rd. If you wanna relive memories from 5 years ago. And I just told you we decided July 30th. And the July 23rd date was, I never wanted players to put on helmets and pads, start practice and then be disrupted. So I thought a 2-week notice was right. And then we did it with 1 week notice and it worked really well. So you may not think some of my stuff's well thought out, but at least it's thought about, maybe not well thought out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.